Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Come on in, have a seat. How's everybody doing?
Good. How are
Did you
you?
have enough sugar and coffee?
No.
And welcome everyone on Zoom. I think we've 5 or so people on Zoom, so thanks for joining us. Thanks everyone for being here in person as well. So we're here to talk about our regional comprehensive regional needs assessment report. That's going to be the primary focus. But we're also going to give some background and context before we dive in. But let me first introduce myself. I'm Amrita Herman. I'm the Dean of Career Education and Workforce Development at the San Diego Community College District. So I serve across City College, Mesa College, Miramar College, and the College of Continuing Education. And then I'm heavily involved in our regional initiatives and the tri-chair for our K-14 Career Pathways work group through Strong Workforce, and have the privilege of participating in some of our regional support for Perkins. And I'm going to introduce Tina. Want to come up and say hello?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I run the Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research in the San Diego-Imperial region. So in addition to labor market research, our center does several special reports, and the Perkins V Comprehensive Needs Assessment is one of those special reports, which I'll get into. And let Amrita kick us off.
Okay. So as I was saying, we're from the San Diego-Imperial County regional area. We're representing regional consortium efforts today, but as you heard, we are not, neither of us are fully working for the regional consortium, but we have our regional chair here, and we'll say that one of the exciting things about the San Diego region is that all 10 of our institutions and district leadership at those institutions gets to participate in all different kinds of regional efforts. And so through Tina's role at the COE and through mine at the district for San Diego Community College District, we've been able to participate in many different ways to help out all different kinds of needs. And one of the big areas of needs was the regional, Perkins V transitions, and of course, the comprehensive local needs assessment. So today we're going to just briefly talk a little bit about some basic background and context setting around what Perkins V is, and some of the key elements. Give a little bit of insight into our regional support for Perkins V, so you have a sense of kind of the regional context in which this regional comprehensive needs assessment report happened in, and then we'll actually dive into the actual report and spend some time with some of the reflective questions. So that'll be the bulk of the presentation. But we're going to just dive right in if that sounds okay to you all. All right. So Perkins V. For those who don't know, it's used to be, I would say now everything's a little different with Strong Workforce, but it is all focused on developing more fully our academic knowledge, technical and employability skills of secondary and post-secondary. It has been the longest consistent federal funding for CTE, both K-12 and community college. And in our state, it's no longer the largest funding for the Strong Workforce, but again, it's the longest and largest consistent funding source. So it first started in the 60s, and then it was reauthorized in 2018 to Perkins V. That's how it got the new name, the Strengthening Career Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. We still just call it Perkins V. But it was a big gap between 2006 and 2018. So we got pretty used to the way the state managed those funds, what we were expected to do, how we reported. So with this change, it felt very disruptive. And so as you all probably know, within your institutions, even though we're in a couple years in, things are still a little uncertain. There's a lot to change and a lot of culture shifts tied to the way that Perkins has been handled. So in terms of those things that have changed, there's really 8 fundamental changes. There's the comprehensive local needs assessment, which is what we're going to focus on today. There's expanded consultation requirements. There's changes in the special populations. There's a change from permissive use to required uses, changes in the core indicators, changes in how we report quarterly, changes in the reserve funds for all of you who lost that money and now have an opportunity to compete for it, right? So there's lots of changes there. And then also the integration of reporting, the application, and all of that into NOVA. So that came with a lot of changes. I would also say, even though these are sort of the 8 key fundamental changes to the core of it, I like to add 2 additional changes just to help with context setting really, is that there's a noticeable change in the state guidance. So with Perkins IV, since they've been around a long time, those who are sort of new to the field, they would come in and you would get worksheets and guides that you could use with your faculty outside of that reporting system that would help you make sure you were ready for federal audit and state requirements. All of those tools no longer apply. And so there's sort of a lack of that kind of, here's what the state tells you to do, here's a template. Now we're seeing that change, they're catching up, they came out with a new CLNA template that's super helpful. So it's starting to build that infrastructure back, but a big change is that really the accountability is at the local level to ensure that you are audit ready for federal requirements. And so some of the support mechanisms are in Perkins 4, you just don't see them in Perkins 5 yet. The other element, very, very important, is that there's much more intentionality around focusing on closing equity gaps. So Perkins has always been about your special populations and focusing on closing those gaps, but the switch to Perkins 5 has really built in more of a formalized infrastructure to keep you focused on that, right? That's how we see the CLNA, it really grounds you. And that's also where the cultural challenges are when we're working with faculty. It's no longer just about equipment needs, it's about gaps. There's large programmatic gaps, special population gaps at the institutional program level, and really facilitating analysis of that. And then if you need equipment to fill that gap, that's okay, but it's not just for equipment's sake, right? So there's a lot of changes with those last 2 elements, so I just like to point them out. So again, with these core changes, the sort of driving force around that accountability is the comprehensive local needs assessment, or the CLNA, and the expanded consultation. So for the CLNA, institutions are now required to conduct a comprehensive local needs assessment every 2 years. And the results have to directly and explicitly drive your institution's local application and the funding decisions you make for that 2-year period. The implementation of the needs assessment is structured around 6 required elements and the expanded consultation. So the 6 required elements, I'm sure you've seen these around, especially if you participated in this morning's Perkins workshop. It's all about evaluating in consultation with your diverse range of stakeholders, how overall CT offerings are measuring up on performance of federal accountability indicators, so those are your core indicators, alignment of labor market needs, scope, size, and quality of programs, progress towards implementing programs and programs of study, recruitment, retention, training of faculty, and then progress towards improving access and equity, so overall improvement of access and equity. There's a lot to these 6 core elements, and what you'll see is sort of different tools that we've tried to provide to support review of these elements, right? So what data do I look at? What questions should I ask? Should I be looking at this regionally? Should I be looking at it institutionally? Should I be facilitating and empowering faculty to look at it by program, by section? So where can I do this analysis? Where do I get the data to do that analysis? What questions should I be asking myself? So those 6 key elements, right? You're supposed to evaluate the data behind those elements with your diverse range of stakeholders. And so this is the required set. So the law needs at minimum these 7 different participant groups. They say that you need to engage them in your initial needs assessment, your local application development, and ongoing consultation. Sometimes there's a magical unicorn program where a Perkins manager already has been contacting these people, and so this is no big deal. Normally, for most of us, this was kind of a change to suddenly say, oh wait, I'm required to definitely talk to my workforce board about my Perkins funding. Well, this is kind of new. As a region, during the first year of Perkins 5, we developed a recommended expanded consultation model, if you will, where we really tried to help all the colleges in the region think about at what level should I be engaging these groups, right? So you could definitely look at the requirement and say, every conversation I have has to be with all these groups all at the same time, all in the same room. That'd be super overwhelming, especially for you and for the groups, right? So in our region, we have one workforce development board. So imagine all of a sudden, if we were all on top of our game, all 10 of our institutions would be calling them and saying, oh, you need to join this committee and this committee and this committee. And we're gonna talk about the same thing at each of them, but differently. That's pretty overwhelming. So through the region, we proposed this model where we're kind of showing, hey, you make sure you have this kind of representation at your program level, at your institutional level, and then at the regional level, we'll engage collectively with this group. And this expanded consultation model was really the catalyst for the regional needs assessment report. We had the first one back in 2020, and now we have the second one that just came out, and so that's what we're going to be transitioning to. But I wanted to pause and just say that even though we're about to submit our second CLNA, right? So our applications are due the very middle of May 15th, May 14th. That's also when our CLNAs are due. Not the 15th of March, not April 20th. I don't all remember how many days have changed, but it is now due the same time your application is due. So we're all about to submit something. Whatever you have, really, just upload it. So this is our second time doing it, but last spring and summer, as a region, there were a lot of questions. So the regional consortia leads were getting all sorts of questions and people asking for additional support and really, how do I manage the CLNA? What exactly has changed? Am I really compliant? And because of that, we decided to get together as a region and think through a way we could address everybody's questions kind of all at once, and also think about leveraging those in our region who are already had a good handle on it and were showing some promising practices. So the region's first step in responding to the inquiries was really to establish a series of workshops to bring the colleges together, all the Perkins leads. It wasn't a formal summit, if you will. It was more of a casual space where those who were getting together, who were leads on Perkins, could bring their Perkins teams and really start sharing and having a conversation. The first one was held back in September. We focused on basic components and requirements. So we presented those 8 changes, but we broke them down. We really talked about each of them individually. We spent some time going through every specific element of the CLNA. And we showcased 2 of our local colleges, their different practices and sort of the challenges they're facing and some of the new tools. And we opened it up to discussion and questions. Through that open discussion, we learned that really we just needed more space and time to share. So one of the fun things about creating space across multiple institutions, just like a conference, you realize the most valuable part is networking and sharing resources. And so while we had this robust agenda, if you will, really the whole part that was open discussion was the most beneficial. And so we kind of switched gears a little bit. And for our October workshop, we really created a space where each of the colleges was invited to share what they were doing, and share in a way that didn't mean like, show us everything shiny, but show us what your actual challenges are, what are you working on, what does your application look like? So we created a shared resource space where people could upload their apps, and that was really the nitty gritty, right? Like you're trying to balance, well, how do I align strong workforce in Perkins? Well, I already know that Miramar does it, so can I just look at their application and just change the logo out? Maybe it's that easy, who knows, right? And so if it is that easy, yes, let's share and let's make it easier for each other. And so that was a really nice opportunity to create that resource space for everyone. But in those conversations, again, everyone came back to the CLNA and feeling like, this is a lot, how do I do it? I'm always feeling behind, right? And so when we went to plan our January session, which was going to be all about the CLNA, we realized that we wanted to put together a resource to help sort of walk people through it. So instead of creating a slide deck, we created a guide, a regional guide to sort of help people feel grounded and something they could take away and use locally if they desired. So we created a fairly robust regional guide framework, if you will. It covers the basics. So you could print it out, send it to a friend and say, here's what CLNA is about. This is the sort of the purpose, the focus, why we're doing it. Here are the timelines. This is something we'd edit a number of times, but once we figured out what the timeline was, we were able to sort of share that with everyone and say, okay, this is when things are due. This is how you upload it. So when we talk about submission requirements, it wasn't just, hey, you need to submit your PDF. It was, here are the narrative questions that are in NOVA. Here are the things that you're going to have to collect from each institution if you're a multi-college district. So really breaking it out so they could think about it and look at it outside of NOVA. Also included a section on being audit ready. So again, as I mentioned earlier, with the changes of state support, there isn't always a lot of guidance on, okay, so I had to do this for NOVA, but it looks like a federal requirement. is slightly over here. So what is the gap and how do I make sure I'm creating a local tool that's useful? So we covered that. And then put in a lot of different resources and reference materials from state, federal, and local sources. And an element of that was that we've taken each of those 6 elements, and again, as I mentioned, broke them out, leveraging some national sites, some statewide tools, and again, some promising practices locally, and said, okay, for this particular element, here are the recommended materials you're gonna wanna pull together. This is the level of analysis you're gonna wanna do. Here's some recommendations as to where you might find this data locally or where you could find it regionally, or here's a state site. So really trying to give a nice guide and even some reflective questions that you might ask your faculty or you might ask your administration, and some recommendations as to when you might start pulling that report, over what time frame, and how you might go about asking your local data folks for that information, right? And kind of translating what you need for them. So we came out with this in January. It's about 22 pages long or so, so there's a lot of elements to it. Right after we came out with this, the state did release their template. And if you haven't seen that, it's a really handy, great starting point for what you need to look at for each element. It's a fillable PDF. So we took that and then revised this guide to incorporate it, to really recommend that use, but making it a really nice companion piece. So it's a really helpful tool because the state framework tells you what you kind of need to to do in each elements, but not exactly what to ask yourself or where you might get all the data and those reflective questions. So together they're a nice piece for our colleges, sort of all in one place. I'll also say doing this really helped with advocacy and communication because we're all on the same page. So when the CLNA was originally due in April and then they moved it to March, we were able to say, hey, dear regional monitor, we actually have a regional guide and regional recommendations, and we're all focused on this April deadline. Because all of our colleges in our region are focused there, can we stick with it? And we had local permission to do so. Then they changed it, and now we can all wait. So now everyone's even happier, we got more time. But it was just a good example of being prepared and connected as a region to really help everyone advocate, especially for our colleges that might not be super on top of all their Perkins. They didn't have to go out and have that conversation. We were able to have it as a region through the regional chair and with our regional monitor. So it really positioned us well. Also doing this work's helped us realize that there's a lot more work to be done. We're thinking about future workshops, maybe doing deep dives with the core indicators or other elements, thinking of different kinds of materials that our colleges might need and things we can look at as a region. And then of course, really being tied to our regional needs assessment and that reporting. And so thinking about the last report, this current report, and then what we want to do to facilitate more engagement with that data. So that is a little bit about how we're doing regional support for Perkins. And we're going to transition over to Tina, who's going to talk about the actual report and engage us all on some of the reflective questions. So Tina.
Thanks, Amrita. All right. So I'll walk us through the special report. As Amrita mentioned, there's a need for a comprehensive local needs assessment at each college. Well, not all the colleges have the resources to do this and consult all those specialty stakeholders that you saw on that list. So as a region, we decided to do a comprehensive regional assessment. It's a report that can be used by all the colleges and incorporated into their CLNAs. So as Amrita mentioned, Perkins V, the official name is Strengthening CTE for the 21st Century. It allows CTE and CE programs across the whole nation to apply for federal funds, which is up to $1.2 billion. And if you're not familiar with the CLNA, it basically asks us to examine the needs of special populations as they navigate the education system. Essentially, what are their needs in order for special populations to be successful in education? Well, the next question would be, okay, we need to know the needs of the special populations. Who are they? So defined by Perkins V, special populations include individuals with disabilities, individuals from economically disadvantaged families, those preparing for non-traditional fields, single parents, out-of-work individuals, homeless individuals, foster youth, foster with military families, and other individuals with barrier to educational achievement. So in the comprehensive needs assessment, you basically need to understand the needs of all of these variety of stakeholders and individuals, which can be a little bit overwhelming because every group has different needs. So we conducted an interview guide for each of the groups, and put it all together into this report. So normally the COE, the Centers of Excellence, we do a lot of quantitative reports. This was one of our only qualitative research reports. And we're very proud of it because we were able to take stories from various interviews and consolidate it into this one report. We did this twice now. So as Amrita mentioned, we did it in 2020. At that time, we conducted 24 interviews with those stakeholders. And when I say those stakeholders, I mean people from special populations and the organizations that serve special populations, including those workforce boards and the four-year institutions and so forth. We did it again in 2021 and 22, this program year, and we doubled that amount. So if anybody asks, how many people did you consult? Well, after doing this 2 times, some of the recommendations and findings were the same. And this time we did 48 interviews. So you can't say that we didn't reach out to our regional stakeholders because we really did interview quite a few folks. The goal was to basically explore those challenges that I mentioned that individuals from special populations face and provide our recommendations for our colleges and how we can better serve individuals from special populations. Of the 48 interviews, half of them, 24, were with individuals, including students and parents, and the other 24 were with community-based organizations that serve special populations. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to refer to them as CBOs for community-based organizations. You might use CBO for something different at your college, but for the purpose of this study, just remember I'm talking about those nonprofits, those service providers in the community. So that was some of the background. I'll walk you through the key findings and our recommendations, and then the reflection questions that we embedded throughout the report. The reflection questions are really to help guide the colleges in thinking about what is it that I have at my college that serves the need of that population. And then at the end, we're going to go into Q&A as a group. We've provided some resources for you, which I'll walk you through after I go through the presentation findings or the report findings. All right, so there are 6 findings in terms of needs. There are 6 needs that we identified in the report. According to both times that we did this, special populations need guidance in navigating the community college system prior to and after enrollment. They also need trauma-informed faculty and staff. They need wraparound services, a caring campus, formal and consistent communication and navigation, increased awareness of in-demand CTE programs and their related occupations. Don't worry, we have this available for you actually. So I appreciate everybody taking that snapshot. Remember, there are a lot of needs, but we try to consolidate it to these 6 trends. Let me walk you through what each of them are, what each of these trends are, these findings are. And as I mentioned, this is a qualitative report. So I wanted to take the stories from the interviews and bring them to life in the report. So I'm going to share with you some excerpts from the interviews. There were over 400 pages of interviews and a lot of audio recordings. So we tried to pick the most relevant points or quotes from the report. So the first finding, guidance in navigating the community college system prior to and after enrollment. So what does this mean? This quote will help us understand it a little better. We asked a community service provider, how can we serve the special population that they serve? How do we better respond to the needs of their special population? This individual was from a CBO that serves people from low-income families, and the person that she referenced was an individual that didn't have access to computer or internet. So she said that when I walked this individual through how to apply for community college, I asked them if we can go on to a computer. That client said she doesn't have a computer. She was hoping to borrow a family member's computer, so she went to their house. And then they forgot and they locked her out, and then she missed the deadline. So a process that we think that's so simple, where we can go online and apply for our community college, was actually quite a bit of a process for an individual who didn't have access to internet or a computer. So they needed guidance, hand-holding them, how to even enroll. After enrollment, there were certain individuals from special populations that expressed their difficulties and challenges after they finally got through the door. Here's a quote from one particular individual who is blind. He's a blind student at one of the colleges. He said that sometimes the instructors just kind of casually mention, oh, there's an exam coming up. And then I'm like, oh, shoot, I need to go get the form from the testing center, have the professor fill it out, then I had to fill it out to get a Braille version of the test. And then I had to go for a specific window of time where I can drop off that form so they can actually schedule my test. So it was actually a lot of work. You kind of had to know how the system was structured. Again, something that is as simple as an assessment that is required of all of our classes was a very extensive process for an individual from special population. And after doing this, he figured it out, but imagine if you missed your first test and then you have to discuss with your instructor why you missed the test. Well, it's because they didn't know what kind of accommodations they needed until they got there. And as first generation students, in a lot of cases, they didn't know that there were these resources. They didn't know that it wouldn't be readily available for them and that they had to build for themselves. So this is just one of an example of the findings. So in our interviews, they just recommended a number of things. I highlighted a few here. Have outreach staff at the colleges go out and provide workshops with prospective students through the application process. So remember, this was a CBO that tried to help their client to apply for college. Why not have some of our folks go out there and work with the CBOs and walk them through that application process? We know it better than the community. Maybe that's what we could do. Another recommendation that the interviewees provided to us was to train the trainer. Let's train our local community-based organizations just how to do this. Work with our case managers and teach us how to do this. So that way we're not always relying on you to do the workshops. All right, as I mentioned, throughout the report, we identified a need, and then we talked about reflection questions. So some of the things to reflect on is, does your institution regularly partner with CBOs or high schools to provide workshops on how to apply to your community college? Does your college do this? How does your institution increase awareness of resources available for special population students before and after they enroll? You might take a look at this and say, Tina, we do this already. We go out into the community and we partner with our CBOs, we walk them through the application process. We do this. If you do, that's great. That's what these reflection questions are meant to help you think about. This report is applicable to every region, not just San Diego and Imperial counties. Because as I go through the other findings, you'll relate and say, I hear this all the time in the community. I hear this all the time from our students. So I hope that as I present these reflection questions and the findings, you'll think, oh, you know what, I can use that quote, I can cite this report in my CLNA and say that this is what we're doing in response to that need. So these are the reflection questions for that one finding. Let's move on. The next finding was that special populations need trauma-informed faculty and staff. Let me read this excerpt from our interviews. After somebody goes through a traumatic brain injury, they often feel like they're the only person going through the situation. They don't know what to do about it. They don't know where to go, even though there are resources available. This was a similar comment we had from all the providers across all the populations. There's some kind of trauma that the people we work with go through. And your faculty and staff need to understand how to deal with people who've gone through some kind of trauma. So they recommended that we train faculty and staff on how to apply a trauma-informed approach to their work. The interviewees also recommended providing trauma-informed training to all students, regardless of special population status, to help them to adjust to college life. To give you an example of this, one of the interviewees said, Florida State University does a really good job of this. Instead of saying, hey, special population, you need this training to teach you how to adjust to college life, they make every incoming and transfer student go through this training module. All FSU students have to go through a trauma and resilience program, and it walks them through experiences that they may have experienced and say, if you've gone through trauma, here are the resources, here's how you can continue to be successful in your college career if you need access to anything. So it's a training program that is required of everybody. Back to reflection. So our faculty and staff encouraged to participate in trainings at your college on trauma-informed practices. What type of orientation does your college provide for incoming students? And does it address trauma? Okay, let's go through the third finding. And don't worry, we'll have a chance to go through some of these reflections. And you're probably thinking on yourself, what's my campus do? We'll have a chance to go through that together. All right, so the third need for the special populations are wraparound services. Again, nothing new. But this is what one of the representatives told us, when you're going through foster care, you're forced to do therapy to keep yourself on track, but we don't want to talk about what we've been taught or told or taught. There's a perception that if you talk, you get in trouble. So in all of our interviews, everybody said, we need wraparound services, childcare, financial aid, transportation assistance, emergency housing, basic needs, food, all of that. But all of the interviewees also said that even though we need that, we are too afraid to ask for it. So the first place we go to find these wraparound services and resources is the college website. You might know what I'm going to say next, but this is a common quote about the college websites that we heard over and over again. It's a miracle to me that anyone enrolls in programs at this community college. Please know, the programs must in fact be extremely excellent to make it past all these barriers. They were talking about all the barriers of digging through that college website to find the wraparound services available at that college. So again, even though we know students need wraparound services, they're not going to ask about it if they're scared to ask for it, so they'll look for it on their own on the website. So the recommendation, not surprisingly, revise our websites to improve the user experience and solicit feedback from the students. Include boilerplate language about wraparound services in the syllabus templates or in communication materials. What do I mean by this boilerplate language? One of our partners over at UC San Diego said, in all of our syllabi, we include information about support services on our campus. This might be a little bit difficult to see, so I'll read it out to you. Not everything, of course. Essentially, it's saying you might encounter some difficulties and challenges as a student at your college. If you need any counseling and psychological services, here's the link. If you experience any food insecurity, here's access to the food pantry. They provide these services discreetly. Again, that word discreet showed up a lot in a lot of these services. And here are just resources in general in the community and on our campus to help serve your needs for wraparound services. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's in every single syllabus that that person taught. And she said that even if the student does not need that resource at the time, the fact that it's in the syllabus, they know where to find it later for that list. Because all our students, I would assume, look at the syllabus over and over again to make sure they're on track with what they're doing with the course. So having this language as boilerplate template language reminds them of what these resources are and where they exist. All right, let's reflect on this. How often does your college use feedback from students or external stakeholders to inform website improvements? Do faculty at your college include information about basic needs resources, food pantry and emergency housing, for example, as standard language in course syllabi? All right, our next need for special populations, a caring campus. I had to work between 40 and 60 hours and go to school at night, because for me, if I didn't make money, it meant I wasn't making my car payment. I wasn't making my rent and so on. There were times where I would have to skip class sometimes to pick up an extra shift. How often do we hear this story from our students that they're working full-time and going to school full-time? The recommendation, build a caring culture on campus where instructors, student workers, staff, and administrators are trained to connect with students. There's a significant amount of studies out there that show that students feel connected to a campus when the people they interact with act like they care about the student. The first line of connection and point of contact are usually faculty members. So are they trained to interact and connect with students, or are they only trained to just interact with them in the classroom? Partner with community-based organizations to provide training on the special populations that they serve. Again, if we don't know what experiences special populations go through, we don't know exactly how to communicate with them, let's partner with our community-based organizations. They've been doing this kind of work. They've been working with special populations for years. Why not ask them to provide training to our faculty, staff, administrators on how to better talk to individuals or connect with individuals from special populations? So our reflections include, how do your instructors accommodate students who consistently experience life challenges? Again, the students that work full-time and go to school full-time. Do you partner with CBOs to provide training about special populations at your college? So in the interviews, I think you can see a trend. A lot of our community-based organizations, when we interviewed them, said, partner with us. We want to learn how to apply to your college. We want to provide training about how to better interact and serve special populations. We want to partner with you. They were very enthusiastic. However, in addition to that, the common trend that happened was a frustration of working with us. I started talking to a representative at a community college, and the conversation kept dying off. And then one of their executives reached out to me, and he apologized because we started a dialogue and it just ended. So this finding is formal and consistent communication and collaboration. A lot of the stakeholders that we interviewed said that all the collaboration is by person. If that person leaves the community college system, that collaboration with that CBO no longer exists. So how do we formalize it and make it more consistent? They recommended that we ensure that the communication occurs regularly and not be dependent on a single person to sustain the relationship with external partners. They also recommended that we increase communication and coordination within the college itself. Because if one person is in charge of all of this information and that person was not communicating it, when they leave, nobody else knew that this relationship was built. So that increased communication and coordination within the college is necessary. All right, let's reflect on this. Do you have formal relationships with the local CBOs that serve special populations? How were these relationships formed and how have they sustained over time? What systems does your college have in place to increase communication and coordination between counselors and instructors and staff? Again, just communication among all parties of campus. Finally, the last finding was that the special populations representatives and the individuals said they wanted increased awareness of in-demand CTE or CE programs and occupations. There seems to be a stigma behind CTE in that, well, we know there's a stigma, so I'll pause there, but there's also a stigma among special populations that there are certain programs that they're just not suitable for. Going back to some of our foster youth representatives, they said that there are foster youth who want to do computer science, but this route, as with other sciences, is a little bit more difficult to get across to them because we, foster youth, have the idea that we're simply not smart enough. So it's not just communicating that CTE programs exist, it's also doing targeted marketing. If you have these skill sets, these interests, these CTE programs are a good fit for you, and getting rid of all that stigma of what's required of the person before they even are eligible for the CTE program. So increasing that awareness and that marketing, so working directly with them, the CBOs, to promote and market CTE directly to their clients. Continuing marketing that CE or CTE programs help students obtain employment quickly, So one of the things that came up in our interviews is that a lot of individuals need to get employed right away. So if they go to community college and they assume that they just have to go through a 4-year route, they don't know that there are programs that exist that is a little bit shorter time frame and they can get employment right away. So continue to market that message to individuals and potential populations. Here are our final reflections for the last finding. Thank you for bearing with me as I show you examples on the 6 findings. But does your college develop messaging specifically to promote CE, CTE programs among special populations? Does your college have a consistent marketing campaign for CE, CTE programs? If so, how is the effectiveness of these marketing efforts evaluated? Here's a summary of those 6 needs that we found in both reports. Again, we conducted 24 interviews the first time and then 48 interviews. So if anybody asks you where's the basis for your findings, just know there were a lot of interviews and a lot of transcript that we consolidated into this report. These are consistent findings. They did not change. And looking around here, it seems like none of this is new to you, but now it's on paper. And now you have a place to cite whenever you apply in those CLNAs. All right, so in our last few minutes, what we're going to do is the reflective activity. So at your tables, there is the executive summary and a link to the report. You don't need to go there now, but it's there for your resource. Each table has a highlighted finding. So if it says guidance in navigating the system prior to and after enrollment, if that's highlighted, those are the reflection questions that your table will discuss. the questions that are in bold were the ones from the presentation. So let's focus on talking at your table and reflecting on the bolded questions for your section. And if you want to move to a different table to discuss, feel free, but there's 6 tables and 6 findings, right? All right, so I'll leave it at that for folks to do the reflections. And while you're doing that, I will put up the contact information for Advertise and myself in case you want to contact us for further information. Is there anything like that? All right, excellent. Thank you everybody for joining us, and let's get into the reflection questions. Advertise and I will walk around and help guide the discussion if needed. Thank you.